It's an amazing experience. It's really just about to start. We've been waiting 4 years of preparation. We've had a fantastic 2 to 3 weeks here in Les Sables, amazing reception, and now it's all about to happen. We can hear all the competitors just leaving. I need to get on board and start the engine and prepare to go.
I'm on board Clara with her skipper Simon Curwen, who was the first to cross the line in the 2022 Golden Globe Race. Simon, congratulations. How did it feel to be the first skipper back?
It was absolutely fantastic, and it really was genuinely a surprise. I've sort of had guesses at times as to where I might be on the course, and actually some of the sort of hints came from people asking me questions about whether I'd be going for line honours and things like that, which I didn't think was going to be a possibility, because I rounded Cape Horn 10 days behind Kirsten and a week behind Abilash. So crossing the line and then being told that actually that I'd managed to catch up that time, absolutely fantastic. But more to the point, it's back in Sables d'Olonne, and the end of an epic voyage, and I felt absolutely brilliant, and it just got better as the day went on.
And what was the first thing you did when you stepped off the boat?
It took me a long time to get off the boat because there were a lot of people on the pontoon, a lot of friends, amazing number of people who'd come, a lot of the family, and so it actually took me a long time. And the first time I got off, I was to give a few people a hug who were on the pontoon.
And you got your cold beer?
And I got my cold beer, and I managed to drink about 3 sips of it. And actually, by the time I'd had a few bits of the champagne as well, by the time I think I got onto the pontoon, normally you feel a bit wobbly because you've come off a boat, but I think it was nothing to do with coming off the boat. I think it was more to do with the champagne and the bit of beer that I had.
Okay. And overall, what do you think about your performance in the race?
So far, I'm actually pretty happy, because at the moment, I mean, I have a few questions that I want to look back, because of course we weren't getting weather information 90% of the time, and what we were able to get was pretty limited. So making tactical choices is literally just using the barometer and what we can see in the clouds, and just making guesswork. And I think I'm pretty happy with everything I did. And some people were questioning from time to time the courses I was taking, most recently going around the Azores, because I took an untraditional route, because there seemed to be no Azores high pressure, and so I skirted round to the east of the Azores to take a direct route and get east in early, for example. And there were a few other times, for example, going down through the Atlantic after we got down through the Les Elises, the trade winds, the southeast trade winds, and we just continued getting southeast winds, and we couldn't make any progress over to Cape Town, and then eventually I worked out there was a high pressure system down there that we just had to skirt round. And so I actually want to play that back and see what other people did, because I don't know, but I'm quite happy with the choices that I made, I think, but I could read back and find out I made some fairly bad mistakes. I mean, particularly, for example, there was that high pressure system that I ran into off Australia, where I got parked up for 4 days and lost all the lead that I'd gained by the Indian Ocean, and it all evaporated, and the boats had come from 760 miles behind to under 100 miles behind by the time we got to Hobart, which was quite frustrating. But I don't think I could have avoided it, but that I want to play back and have a look at.
And talk to me about your routing, because you basically sailed fewer miles than anyone else. You had to sail an extra 2,000 miles to get to Chile to make repairs, if you count there and back, to make repairs to your hydrovane. But you still sailed fewer miles. So your routing was pretty much straight lines?
Yeah, I mean, unless one's got a particularly good reason to go somewhere, and we didn't have the information really to do that, and particularly in these boats which I mean, if you're going to go off course, it's going to take a long time to do those extra miles. So actually, just steering the direct route was likely to be a race winning option. So that was my focus. Yeah, so I think in all I probably did an extra, because of course I went up and I did 2,500 miles in total going up to Chile, but I did knock off 1,000 or odd miles on route. So I think I did about 1,500 miles extra doing that detour to get the repairs. I mean, it is amazing that you have to go that far up Chile to get to somewhere that you can fly parts into and get spare parts. But that's the nature of the place, and it's a very rugged coastline. Of course, I didn't have adequate charts or anything to get up there. But yeah, so sailing direct routes was what it was all about.
And how did you choose your routing based on the lack of weather information you had? And obviously you haven't got the benefit of electronics. How do you do it without that?
Well, yeah, I mean, to be honest, I followed pretty much the Clipper routes. So it's traditional sailing routes, and in the old pilot charts, they have got the traditional sailing routes. I've looked at the routes that people took last time. Of course, they had some different waypoints in the South Atlantic. They didn't have to go around Trinidad, but I looked at routes that people have done in the Vendée, that they did in the last GGR or other races, and pretty much followed those routes. So it really was down. I mean, we had to go to the Canaries anyway, so direct route down to the Canaries, as direct as possible. Then Cape Verde's, it's pretty traditional, and I went absolutely west, just west of all of the Cape Verdes, a bit too close to the last the last island, and then down absolutely banging us south, going through the doldrums. I mean, that I've been through before in the mini transat when we went down to Brazil, and certainly the winning tactic is just don't deviate and go east and west, just anything that takes you as quickly as possible, south going south and north coming back. And so that's the tactics there. And then after that, actually we're mostly on exclusion zones in the southern oceans that we couldn't go below, so pinging pretty close to that. I started off a little bit extreme in the south, and I was trying to get a bit too close, and every time a big northwester blow would come in, I'd have to call up race control and say, look, there's a chance here I'm gonna, for safety reasons, I'm gonna get pushed over the exclusion zone. Could I have dispensation in case? Actually, I never got pushed over once, but after a while I decided, instead of sailing 20 miles away from the exclusion zone, I'd move up a little bit and sail 40, 50 miles away and give myself a bit of margin. Sail a few extra miles, but save me the stress of the worry of going over and getting penalised.
Was it quite difficult to hold your nerve at those times and not chase the wind and just stick to the route that you decided?
No, that never really was a big issue. I mean, the times when it was a bit nervous was having to sail around the big South Atlantic high pressure zone, and there I was sailing an awful lot of miles. We sailed all the way. Normally, after passing Trinidad at 20 degrees south, normally you'd cut the corner and head to Cape Town, and I had to sail all the way down, pretty much, in fact, to the latitude of Cape Town itself, down to 32, 34 degrees before I could turn left, and so that's a lot of extra miles. But so that I was nervous about that, because I knew that some people had tried to cut across earlier, and of course, we don't know about the weather systems, and so I could have got that wrong, but I felt reasonably confident, and that was a tricky time, because at the time I couldn't use my number one Genoa, because I'd had a halyard failure, and having tried to repair it, I'd messed things up even more and got everything jammed up at the top of the mast. So I was without spinnakers and without Genoa for 4 weeks for the whole of that section. So I was slightly nervous on the whole of that section.
You were obviously very surprised with your speed up the Atlantic, which was pretty impressive. I mean, you made gains and then eventually overtook them.
Yes, I mean, interestingly, of course, I didn't know all of that. So it was actually just in discussions where it became apparent, talking to GGR and things, that actually people were talking about the potential of me catching up and things, and I was thinking that really can't be possible at this stage. But I think in hindsight, I knew at the time I'd been quite lucky with the weather. I mean, I was, as ever, I was pushing. I wasn't really pushing to race because I was out of the race, and I didn't think I could catch up the time. But then I got a very good weather system with a high pressure below me at about 40 degrees south, and that pushed me all the way up the Brazilian coast and right up into the trade winds. So instead of getting the variables, which can be very antisocial, I'd had fantastic. So I thought I'd have made some pretty big gains there, but I didn't think I'd have made that much gain. But I did know by the time I got to the equator that I had caught them up, because I had radio contact with a cruise ship that passed right beside me, and they were quite interested in who I was and what I was doing, and they were telling people on the boat what. So they were on the website, I referred to them website, and they gave me the positions, and we were just in a long line east-west across at 4 degrees. I was just a little bit north, and they were just tiny bit south of 4 degrees, and so yeah, that was a big surprise.
And you said you were kind of cruising, but did you get your racing head on then? You must have.
I mean, the thing is if you ask any of my daughters or Claire, I mean, when I'm cruising, I'm racing anyway. It really doesn't make any difference. I'm always trimming sails and steering the fastest course. Didn't really, frankly, make an awful lot of difference.
So your tactic to kind of stay out in front and did involve trimming sails all the time. You're focused on that, making sure the boat was at its optimum. What about breakage? I mean, what kind of equipment damage did you suffer?
So I mentioned the halyard. I mean, that was the biggest issue. I really don't know what the issue was or still is there, because the halyard went after 4 weeks. 4 weeks from the start. Okay, I mean, it wasn't. I mean, it was. Yeah, it's not that old. It was probably a couple of year old halyard, and I hadn't noticed any wear before that. So that was the biggest one, and I couldn't actually replace that. I had that try, and I got bashed around at the top of the mast and failed miserably, and just messed things up even worse. So that was the biggest issue, and after that, I mean, it did cause me a bit of delay, because I had to drop the sail every week to check it and move the halyard. So I was cutting off sections of the halyard just to move the wear point. And actually, I'm getting pretty much to the limit now of the length of the halyard that just survived the route. Other breakages, I mean, obviously the big breakage was the hydrovane, which is a critical one. I had a solar panel go down. Actually, most of my damage happened in that period around the end of the trade winds, when we were at the high pressure South Atlantic high pressure. I lost a spinnaker pole over the side, which was as far as I was concerned was well clipped on, but I heard it rattling around, and I went and changed the course and to go up on because it was a bit rough and wet on the deck, and by the time I looked, it had gone. So I'd lost that at the halyard. A solar panel went down, and I thought, well, one solar panel going down after 4 weeks, and I'm pretty reliant on the solar panels. They're not going to last the route, so that could be me without power. I had got the Watton-Sea hydro generator, but I really wanted to keep that as a backup, and I hardly used that at all. I didn't have total confidence in the installation, because it's actually very difficult to do a good installation of the hydro generator with the hydrovane, which is bang center on transoms that are sloping. They're designed to go on modern boats with vertical transoms. So the installation's a bit of a cobbled together installation. So I really wanted to keep that as backup. So all that damage was happening over a period of a few days in just after the trade, just off Brazil. So there I was beginning to worry about whether that was going to get round. But apart from that, I had the wave strike, which knocked out an awful lot. I mean, it really ripped through the top of the boat, taking out the canopy, ripping it out of its out of its mountings, ripping the mountings out of the deck. Damaged the hydro generator, bent the blade completely, so that actually if we put it down, it would the propeller was just hitting the hydrovane rudder. The hydrovane was completely out of operation. Yeah, so there was a lot of damage, and I mean it just swept across. It took ripped rope bags off the boom. The mainsail was pulled out of the track through the stop at the bottom. Yeah, it was, so those really, I mean, there was that period before, just after the equator, down south, the trade winds, and then the wave, which was just before Cape Horn.
And you obviously didn't expect it, because you would have tried to prevent being hit by the wave. I guess, were you on deck at the time, asleep at the time?
So I was in probably the worst gale, or it was a severe gale rather than a storm, and not absolutely extreme. I mean, there was warning of gusts of 50 knots, but I mean that isn't extreme for the Southern Ocean. I had all the sails down. I had the canopy was folded flat and tied down. I was prepared for it. And I'd gone through all these systems coming through. You get northwest first, and the waves are building, and that goes on, and then it swings around through the west, and then eventually goes around through the southwest. And so you've got all these wave systems. You've got the existing swell from the west, and then you've got the northwest that came through on the system, and then the southwest. And so I'd just been up on deck just 20 minutes, half an hour before, and changed my course to take into account the new southwesterly. So I'd gone pretty much due east. So I was taking the northwest waves on one quarter, the southwest waves on the other quarter, and the rolling westerlies. So I put it in the best position I thought for taking the waves. It seemed quite comfortable. I came down below and caught some sleep, because I hadn't had much sleep up to that point, waiting because I needed to catch this width as the system where the front went through. And then I'd been asleep probably for 20 minutes, and actually I never heard the wave. I actually have no recollection of the wave hitting, but clearly the boat was just bounced by the wave landing on it. So it was a serious wave, and the boat was knocked down onto the starboard side to begin with, and then either knocked down back onto the port side, or just righting moment of rolling it, because I was thrown out to the port side, and actually there was as much of the contents of the cabin were thrown onto the port side as the boat rebounded up as they were the other side. And I was still finding a few bits tucked away in odd places. And I did go down reasonably far, because things had gone pretty much sort of horizontally. And of course I lost the Windex, which is a bit of an indication that the mast could have gone into the water, but I'll never know.
And the damage to the hydrovane, obviously you needed to head to port for a replacement.
To repair it, I had to go to port. It was the main casting on the head of the hydrovane. Unfortunately, I've got the part here somewhere, but it's back at the house. But it's a fundamental part which is really strong, and it's not a part. I mean, I've got a lot of spare parts, or quite a lot of spare parts for the hydrovane, but it's things that they expect to break or could break, and that isn't something that they expected to break or I expected to break. I haven't had an opportunity to talk to them and give my experiences, but it will have taken, what will have happened is that the vane itself will have been extended to a maximum. The wave will have landed on top, and rather than the frame being a weak point or something else being a weak point, it was actually the whole casting, which the head of it. So impossible to make a repair or conceive a repair, because it's got all the things that translate the vane movement into an up and down movement through the piston that eventually provides the turning on the rudder. And impossible. I thought about it for a while, but it didn't take too long to realize there was nothing I could do to repair that, even in a workshop. So then the question was, is there any way that I can continue sailing without a hydrovane? Because I mean, if one thinks back to 1968, Robin Knox Johnson he lost his system. I mean, he had damage to it early on, but it was completely destroyed by the time he got to Australia. So he did half his Golden Globe without a. So I tried that for 2 days. I tried finding a way. I mean, the boat, it's partly the shape of the boat. She's got a high bow, so she blows off the wind. She really just likes to sit sideways to beam onto the waves, which is not the way to take Southern Ocean waves. So anywhere from beam reaching up to close hauled, I could set her and she could sail a sensible course. And I tried every combination of sheeting, sails out to windward, storm jibs, anything to try and make that work. I even tried briefly towing a drogue to one side, see if that would work. And for 2 days I tried seeing if I could do it, and I had a good wind direction that allowed me, and I was doing 6 knots in the right direction for a while, but that was only because I had the right wind direction, and as soon as it went back to a more normal wind direction, I wasn't able to set a decent course. So what that meant was, yes, I could have sort of effectively jibed downwind and waited and done a lot of hand helming, but it meant I was going to be slow, and then there was an even bigger weather system coming up behind, which GGR warned me about, that was coming up in normally if I'd been going at speed I'd have passed Cape Horn and been round by the time it hit, but because I was slow with the steering without the hydrovane, I'd have got clobbered by that, and I thought it was irresponsible to continue. I'd have loved to have found somewhere a bit easier, quicker to get into in Chile, but I didn't have charts for it, and I was advised against going into the Beagle Channel or into Ushuaia from that route to come in from the west. So ultimately I went up to Puerto Montt in Chile, which is a long detour to get a spare part.
Disappointing, obviously, I'd imagine. How did you decide to carry on? I mean, you could have finished there and then, really, couldn't you?
Well, I mean, the first thing is, if I'd finished there and then, the boat would have been in the wrong place, and I had absolute commitment to getting the boat back. so that was a first consideration, because yes, I mean, to begin with, I was wondering whether I should continue or not. Then, I mean, when I started this race, I'm probably pretty much on record as saying that the objective was to get round and to do the circumnavigation. It was a great opportunity to do it in the company of others and to do it safely with race control. And I was always going to sail as fast as I could and tactically as well as I could. But it wasn't my primary objective to win it. But then, of course, having been in the lead for 2/3 of the course, and I'd started. I was 8 days away from going around the Horn, and then I thought that well, if I got around the Horn first with that sort of lead, then actually, yeah, there was a pretty good chance. And so, of course, you start dreaming and thinking that it'd be really nice to win this thing now that I'm in the lead. So I built up an expectation over a few weeks, which had gone beyond my original ambition. But then actually, of course, it's quite quick to go back to say, well, actually, the objective was to sail around the world. I can still do that, get up, do the repairs, and finish the job. And I was still in time with the delays that I could round Cape Horn at a sensible time of the year before we got into their winter.
You were probably one of the most experienced racers taking part in the race. Do you think that gave you an advantage in terms of knowing how much you could push your gear?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that, I mean, I think there were only really a couple of people with the sort of racing. There was obviously Damien Gaillou, who's a very experienced French racer. Most of the other racers sailors were not real racers. So certainly I think I got more out of my boat than the vast majority of them. I probably sailed more tactically than most of them. In terms of the experience, there were a lot of people with more, or some people with more Southern Ocean experience than me. Kirsten and Abhilash. Abhilash has already done 1.5 circumnavigations, and Kirsten knows the Southern Oceans a lot. Tapio, who unfortunately didn't make it, he's been round before. There were a lot of people, and of course, actually, I didn't mention Tapio, but of course, he's a racing sailor. I mean, he's a racing dinghy sailor. You don't have to be a big boat racing sailor, but some ways better a dinghy sailor, because you're more likely to have done solo and two-handed sailing rather than as a team. So certainly, yeah, I think that sort of racing background gave me an advantage tactically and getting the most out of the boat.
And the isolation, that was never a problem for you?
No, it wasn't actually. I didn't really expect it to be. I'd never done anything like that duration. I mean, the most I'd ever done was about a month solo. I didn't really think it was going to be an issue. I ran out of books to read, which was a complete miscalculation on my part. I had a whole load of books that I had intended to bring, and they just got left behind. So actually, because there are whole periods of time when actually I thought I'd be doing more spinnaker work and more actual real sailing, but the amount of times that you could use the spinnaker, because of the sea state, I mean, it just wasn't feasible. It wasn't even feasible to run with any head sails. So an awful lot of the race it did with just the mainsail up. When the wind's down behind, which it is for the majority of the race, when it's dead behind, there was no benefit to be gained, and all that's happening, you've got more sails flogging around and doing damage, and it's not making the boat go any faster. So I sort of slightly miscalculated on not so much the solitude thing, but the boredom of just not having enough to do and keep me interested.
So how did you get over that? How did you keep yourself motivated?
Well, luckily after my stop in Chile, I got a new library on board. The people have picked up on my pleas, and so I got a whole bunch of new books sent through to me by my supporting partner and by the family, and Claire bought those all out, so that was a relief. But otherwise, yeah, there were times, and I think I said on record that I'd got cabin fever. That I mean, when you're sitting down below, because the movement of the boat makes it very uncomfortable and the weather's pretty foul outside, that you're really just stuck down below sitting, because yeah, there's not a lot to do. So after a week of confinement, that yeah, I certainly got a bit of cabin fever at times. But that, as soon as you get outside and start sailing again, that goes.
And I mean, mentally, we all know that the GGR is not just about seamanship; it's a mental challenge as well. How do you think you cope with that side of it?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I heard a few bits on the radio, and I know that some people, from time to time, that bit got on top of them, because you can tell that it gets pretty stressful, whether it's stressful. I mean, I got a bit stressed, for example, down in, when I was sitting there and knowing that the boats were catching up with me and my lead was going, and could I get out of this high pressure zone? That's when it does get a little bit stressful, and yeah, I was less relaxed at arriving in Hobart, I think, and then picking up on a little bit of information as to what was going on elsewhere in the race.
Because obviously, unlike a lot of other people, you couldn't transmit for pretty much the entire race, could you, on your radio?
I couldn't actually transmit at all. Well, yeah. I mean, the only times I could transmit was in the prologue race, and the first day when the boats were within about 10 miles, and then I found out that actually my communication, my installation of the counterpoise on the effectively the earthing of the HF radio was totally incompetent. It's my fault. I knew what I needed to be doing, but I wasn't prepared to put the to bolt on the honeycomb on the outside of the boat because it was going to make it go slower. So having spent all that time preparing the hull and making it as smooth as that, and then and the yard doing a fantastic paint job on it, they said, you're not going to bolt that to the outside of your boat having done all of that, are you? So I was persuaded not to, which was a mistake. It would have been nice to have been able to transmit, but I could listen to other people. I felt a bit like a spy because I couldn't tell them that I did pass the message on that I could through actually Peter Mott and through GGR, that I could actually hear them if they didn't mind me listening in on our conversations, but I couldn't transmit. So the only conversations I had was with GGR, and then I had a conversation with a Coast Guard off Stewart Island, off New Zealand, which was great, and the lighthouse keeper at the Horn, had a lovely conversation with him, and the occasional boat, and that really was it.
Talk me through your kind of boat husbandry. What were the checks you did every day? How often did you fire the engine up?
Yeah, so I had a checklist of things, particularly after I had a number of shackles undoing themselves, and a few of them were very critical shackles. One of them was the foot of the furled genoa, and that's a specialist shackle, and I had absolutely no spare on board. So I had to spend quite a lot of time filing down a shackle and modifying it so that it could go in place. After that, I also lost another one, which again was unique on board, which was on the boom vang, or the kicking strap, and that came undone. So I clearly wasn't doing enough controls. So I did go around and put cable ties in where I could, and then had a checklist of which was it was a weekly checklist really, but it was done on a more frequently to check shackles and particularly to check halyards, because my main halyard was wearing that's quite easy to see because every time I reefed it you could see that. Yeah, and I had wear on things like that. For example, on the furling systems, the main wear I had was on the staysail, which isn't too critical because if that unfurls itself in a bit of a blow, I could drop the staysail. But if the genoa in a big blow had unfurled itself just as I was trying to furl it, and it had worn through, then that would have been a nightmare trying to get that down in a big blow. So I became a lot more conscious of doing the checks. I had a checklist which included shackles and things. It also included, after a while, the mounting bolts on the hydrovane, because I had an issue with that they came loose, and then to actually tighten them I had to climb into the stern locker and tighten those up. So that happened for the first time. The first time it happened was south of Australia. So at least in the 4 days of calm I was able to do quite a lot of maintenance on the boat, including that. But I had to do it 2 more times because I couldn't. I mean, you need a spanner on the outside and on the inside, which is really difficult to do. So I had to tie a spanner on the outside, and I've got a little video of me doing it, which I don't know if that ever got posted. But yeah, so those are the sort of checks that I was doing, and checking that solar panels were doing. I redid connections. In the end, I had to hardwire and get rid of the connectors because the waterproof connectors just weren't waterproof, and they dissolved with the current, the voltage going through them, the copper terminals. I mean, they were just bleeding liquid copper. So I eventually just had to hardwire them in, which meant that I couldn't take the solar panels down below and protect them. So they just lived up on the cockpit floor, taking up all my nice big cockpit area that I'd created when I took out the wheel. Got used by solar panels. It's very greedy of them. So yeah, those are particularly critical items. I did regular checks.
And the engine, did you turn it once a week?
Yeah, I turned it not necessarily once a week, but then I had major issues with the engine. I had 2 particular issues. One was a fuel issue. So I was taking in water, which I thought it was coming in through the filler pipe, so I sealed that all up with Sikaflex and liquid electric tape, which was good. but then actually it was coming in through the breather vent, some water. So I had a lot of water in, which meant I had to bleed that out through the system. And I disconnected the vent completely, so it now ventilates inside the hull, which probably isn't totally advisable. But then I wasn't refueling, so it didn't matter. Then the next problem was that, probably as a part of a result of that, I then got microbial growth within these, despite having biocide in there. And that completely blocked the filter. I thought it was the lift pump on because it didn't appear to be working, but it was actually being blocked further down. So I did a fairly messy operation, because I didn't carry a spare filter, so I had to try and clean out with a toothbrush and clean out the filter. Diesel everywhere and a bit messy. And I tried also just filling a can and doing a gravity feed, and that failed. I've got more diesel all over the place. So those were some of the problems, and actually in the end, the engine really was pretty unreliable when it was cold, interestingly. But as soon as I got up and the fuel was less viscous, and then actually it started working much better, and I could get some life out of it. But for a while, certainly I could run it for 10 minutes, and here at the finish I ran it for 10 minutes. That was fine. But it was still a bit of an issue. But I ran it probably at least once a month, probably once every 2 weeks.
What was the lowest point of your race?
Certainly the lowest point would have been definitely when I had to move to Chichester Class and make the detour. Yeah, there's no doubt about that.
And the highest point?
Highest point, I mean, there were some really good high points. I mean, some of them were actually, I mean, I will have moaned about having to do these photo drop stops, and they are disruptive. There is absolutely no doubt about it. I mean, high points, the start was absolutely amazing. I mean, the people here in Saint-Alon are so enthusiastic about it, and the number of people who are just lining the side. I mean, and for the 2.5 weeks before, the tens of thousands of people who are just genuinely interested. Absolutely amazing. So those were high points, and the finish was equally a high point. But the stops actually were great, particularly down in Hobart, where I had some friends who'd flown out on Christmas Eve and spent their Christmas flying back to home to Sydney, and they'd come out to see me. That was very special. And yeah, and Claire, I mean, it was all part of the down, but my wife Claire came out to Chile and hand carrying the spare parts for that, and my great mate Paul came out to help with that. So there was a bit of, I mean, it was difficult to be really high there because of the circumstances, but those were probably big high points. Going around Cape Horn, I had fantastic weather for it and had a lovely conversation with the lighthouse keeper at Cape Horn. So that was a big high as well.
If you were to do it again, what would you do differently?
Well, the first thing is I won't do it again. I mean, the purpose was not to go and win the Golden Globe. So I don't have unfinished business. The purpose was to do a circumnavigation. My motivation, my inspiration came from the first people to do it, from Francis Chichester to do it with the stop. So it's a bit of a coincidence that I ended up in the Chichester Class with one stop, and then of course Robin Knox Johnston. And I was a very impressionable young lad at the time, and I'd vowed I would do it, and actually I'd given up on that hope because there wasn't an opportunity to do it. I wasn't going to do a Vendée or a campaign like that. It was just out of reach. And then the Golden Globe came back again 50 years later. And so yeah, the answer is I won't be doing it again. What would I do differently? Not huge amounts. Not huge amounts. I would take that spare part for the hydrovane head because it is a critical part. there's not much else that I would have taken as spare parts, additional spare parts. I mean, some people, Edward, for example, took 2 or 3 of absolutely everything. And the boat is so heavily laden, there can't have been much room for him on board. It was quite extraordinary. But I mean that he's a belt and braces man, and that's his way of doing it, and hats off to him, because that, I mean, he wouldn't have had to retire with a hydroplane problem. So I would take that, but other than that, I would make sure that I had a working transmitting HF radio, and I'd spend a bit more time actually learning. I mean, it's quite tricky because we're using old technology, and it just didn't support it. So we had to take a radio direction finder, but there aren't any transmitting signals, so I mean, it's pretty pointless taking it because it isn't backed up, and I've got the weather facts sitting there, and there are only a few parts in the world where weather is regularly sent out on the weather facts. Most parts it isn't. So it was very frustrating. I would do a bit more research on that whole front to find out where I could get weather information in advance. It was way down on my priorities in terms of preparing it, and I left it too late to get that sort of information.
And the worst storm you went through, and what tactics did you use?
Well, the worst storm I went through was the one that knocked out the hydrovane. So my tactics on that, I think it was the only one where I actually dropped all working sails. I still had effectively my storm jib was a partially furled staysail, and I had that sheeted in line, so that if I was knocked off course, or the hydrovane was knocked off course going down a wave, there was an additional force to bring the boat back downwind, and that was the plan. And the plan was to keep the waves fractionally not going directly down wave, but onto a quarter. So as I was describing earlier, with the northwest swell and the southwest swell, I'd move it so that there was waves coming on each quarter, rather than going dead downwind. And that's basically the tactics for the heavy weather. All my heavy weather was downwind. I didn't have reaching or upwind heavy weather, extreme weather.
And finally, what's your advice to any of the 2026 Golden Globe Race skippers?
There's quite a lot of preparation that a lot of stuff that we get given at the last minute, that there isn't really time to get used to. I mean, it's even the things like the sat phones and the yellow brick transmitters and things like that. Some of those are really frustrating to use, and the manuals that come with them are completely useless. So actually you can get hold of those, and anybody who wants to come and have a play with them, getting a bit of instruction. I mean, it would have been really useful to have a little course, half-hour briefing on some of the equipment, particularly the safety equipment, on how to use it. That would have saved us an awful lot of hassle. The other big advice is start early. It is too stressful to leave it to the last minute. I had 3.5 year run up to mine, and it was a pretty busy time. And it is all about planning and preparation. Do your planning well in advance. Work out what it is you need. Start collecting all these bits of antique equipment that you need to take with you, because you've got to find it on eBay, and it's an awful lot easier if you just pick it up. The equipment lists are probably available fairly early on. They're not going to be that different from ours. And do the preparation and get out and do some mileage. Obviously, one's obliged to do the 2,000 mile. I did my qualifier 2.5 years in advance. there was a phenomenal amount of learning in that, and I did my qualifier before doing the yard work, so I knew where all the leaks and the weak points were. I think that's a really good idea to do it, to do that. So those would be some of my recommendations. And yeah, don't leave the jobs that you really hate doing, like the radio installation and the electrics. Don't leave it to the last minute, because like me, yeah, it'll land you in some degree of trouble.